Okay. My name is Emma Donnelly. Today is June 23rd, 2022, and I'm here with my grandmother. Grandma, could you please introduce yourself, how you'd like to be introduced for the recording?
My name is Linda Donnelly, and I'm Emma's grandmother.
Perfect. So I want to start kind of as far back as we can go. So in terms of our ancestors, how far back do you know the names? How far back can you tell me?
I think I can tell you back to my father's grandmother, my great-grandmother on my father's side. I'm pretty sure her name was Constance, as was my grandmother.
On both sides?
No, my grandmother.
Oh, you're saying your great-grandmother and your grandmother.
And my grandmother, I believe, were both. I know my grandmother was Constance, but I think my great-grandmother was also.
And that was your paternal grandmother?
Yes.
Okay, and then her husband was?
I did not ever know or see him that I know of.
Okay. But they're the ones who immigrated, right?
I believe the first one, I don't know exactly when they immigrated, but I know the first one to immigrate was my grandfather, my nano, on my father's father.
And do you know anything about when they immigrated, or any stories that you heard over the years?
No, I'd have to look that up because I do have some documents and pictures of them when they immigrated.
Okay. And then on your mother's side, how far back do you know?
I only know to my grandmother, my mother's mother.
Okay. What was her name?
Catherine.
And you know your grandfather's name?
It might have been Emil, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Do you know anything about the immigration on that side?
No.
Okay, well then let's talk about your grandparents. Do you know, what did they do for work?
Well, I know my grandmother on my mother's side worked in a factory that's made women's lingerie.
Where was
really that? Nice, not risque, really, really nice, beautiful stuff. And she would bring some home all the time. So he always had really beautiful pajamas and night coats and underwear.
Well, that sounds nice. Where was that?
When?
Where?
Oh, I don't know where she worked, somewhere in Chicago.
In Chicago.
And she worked till she was 65.
Wow. And then on your father's side?
On my father's side, I'm not totally sure because I don't know it firsthand. But my grandfather came over first and worked. I was told he first went to New Orleans and worked in the sugarcane fields. But I never heard that from anybody. Terribly reliable.
Gotcha. Well, on your nano and nana, so those were your father's parents.
Right.
They spoke Italian, right?
Yes.
And did your father speak Italian too?
Yes.
So what was it like to grow up with family members who spoke Italian?
Well, the problem was I couldn't understand them, although they did talk, and they spoke some English, but not real clearly.
Why do you think that you didn't ever learn to speak Italian? They didn't teach you?
No, they didn't. I think everybody in that generation especially wanted to be Americanized only. In fact, my father's younger sisters did not speak any Italian at all. They couldn't even understand it.
Did you grow up around a lot of other Italians and Italian-speaking people, or mostly your family?
No, just my family.
But you had a lot of family members in the area, like aunts and uncles and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you remember of them?
They had dogs. They didn't have children. One of my father's sisters did have a boy who was about 2 years older than I am.
What were the kind of industries that your parents and kind of their siblings worked in? They all have kind of different careers, different jobs?
Yeah, I really don't know what they did. The only one I know for sure is my Uncle Frank, my father's oldest brother. Eventually was the vice president of Pompeii Oil Company, olive oil company. I know that for sure. And my Uncle John, a younger brother of my father's, worked for Ma Bell.
And these were the Skarnavacs.
Yes.
But could you tell me a bit about that last name and how they got that last name? The story?
Well, it got changed when they immigrated. The immigration people changed. I guess they Americanized it.
What was the original last name?
Well, the closest I've ever known is Skarnavacci.
All right. Well, so what did your parents do for work? Could you first tell me their names and a little about them and what they did for work?
My mother was Marie and my father was Samuel. And my mother did not work until much later. Actually, shortly before my father died, she started working. And my father was always an architect. I suppose he first was a draftsman and then an architect.
Is that sort of like The Apprentice? Draftsman?
Yeah, I think you have to be a draftsman first. I mean, not educationally, but you had to know how to draw.
All right. Well, now let's go to when you were born. So when and where were you born?
I was born at Woodlawn Hospital on the south side of Chicago. It's not there anymore.
No. And
in 1940.
Okay, great. So did you grow up on the south side of Chicago?
Yes.
What was that like?
Further south, though, than like the hospital was.
Okay.
South side actually goes all the way to the Loop. And anything south of the Loop was the south side. Anything north of the Loop was the north side.
And so you were on the pretty far south.
Far south.
What was that like in the 1950s?
Well, it was a very nice neighborhood.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was the best. I don't know that it was the best place to raise children because my brother got kind of spoiled and really thought about money a lot. That was his big interest.
It seemed like a lot of people had money in the area.
Yes. They probably didn't, but it seemed that way.
So eventually you moved north in Chicago, right?
My family? No.
Not as a kid.
No.
Okay. We'll get to that later then.
Actually, we lived several different places that I don't remember. I just know that we lived there. One was Decatur, Illinois, and I believe that was south of Chicago. I'm not really sure. But my father probably had a job there, and that's why we moved there. Mm-hmm. And then we lived in two different places that I know of in Evergreen Park, which was immediately west of the far south side of Chicago. And then we moved to Beverly Hills. It was called South Side of Chicago. And I'm sure they moved because of the space.
Because they wanted more space?
I think so, yeah.
Because they had 4 kids.
Well, I think by this time they only had 3, but...
Your older sister had moved out?
No.
Oh, you mean they hadn't had the 4th?
They hadn't had the 4th one yet.
Okay, so speaking of that, will you tell me about your siblings? Kind of the age?
Oh, my brother is 3 years older. And we were very close as youngsters. We played together, went places together. He would usually take me with him. But then when he turned about 10, that was it. Actually, when we moved to after we moved to Beverly Hills, I rarely saw him anymore. He hung out with the boys, and I was too young to hang out. And then I have a sister that's 6 years younger and a sister that's 10 years younger.
Okay. So what kind of things did you do, like, say, with your parents for fun or your siblings for fun growing up?
Well, growing up, what I remember especially, since I pretty much grew up in Evergreen Park, we moved when I was 7. I spent my younger years there. And I was sickly, so I was in the house a lot, getting better. And I never knew how sick I was.
Yeah, tell me about that.
My parents never dwelled on it or made it an issue.
So
but I know I was.
What was going on? Like, what kind of...
Well, I had bad asthma. I mean, if I went outside, I'd wheeze.
Wow.
And then they'd have to call the doctor to give me shots of adrenaline. I had an adrenaline spray, which helped in the beginning. And I had like all the childhood illnesses and more.
Like chicken pox,
mumps, measles, scarlet fever.
Sure. So you were out of school a lot?
I must have been. I don't remember being out of school a lot, but we didn't have kindergarten, so I didn't start school till I was 6.
Would you say you kind of continued being kind of the, quote, sickly kid, like, throughout? Like, did that continue through high school, or like how long did that last?
Not through high school. Well, it lasted years, but I never was babied about it.
Right.
Never. I used to have to, if I did wheeze when I was out playing, I'd go home and they'd either call the doctor or shoot me with adrenaline, and then I'd just have to rest a while because it speeds you up. Makes like you're running. And then I'd just go back out and play. Same thing had happened, I'd come back in. So see, they never really stopped me from doing that kind of thing. So that was good. I'm grateful for that.
So they didn't have asthma spray back then? Like inhalers?
They had inhalers, but they were glass tubes.
Did you have one?
Yeah, but I couldn't use it myself to begin with.
Oh, when you were little.
I always carried a big purse because the atomizer was like this big.
So that's
and
like...
it had to be in a box because it was glass.
I'm just going to say for the recording, in case there isn't video, you did kind of like maybe 8 inches by 6 inches, something like that. That's pretty big.
Yes, it was very big.
To carry around
awkward.
As a little kid.
Right.
Kind of heavy.
So I couldn't. I used to have to go home.
While we're on the topic of medical, things. You told me once about how your tonsils got taken out. I'd like to hear if you could tell that story.
Well, I only knew about this actually when I turned about 30, right after we moved to Florida. My brother called me and told me that he had heard from Michael Reese Hospital, which was a hospital in Chicago, which isn't there anymore. And they were trying to find me, as well as the other 15 or 20 kids who had these x-ray treatments on their tonsils to shrink them. And then they were finding that there was a high incidence of thyroid cancer among this group of people. So I had to go to get tested. I went to Shands and got tested, and I was fine, fortunately. But yeah, no, they shrunk them. I guess because I was so sickly, they didn't think I could survive a tonsillectomy.
It seems like some experimental treatment too.
Sounds like it.
Sounds like it.
That's about right, and it would have been in the late 40s.
So another medical thing is I know you broke your back growing up. So I was wondering if you could tell me about that and kind of how that affected you after the injury.
I mean, the circumstances of when it happened?
Yeah.
Well, to set the stage, my father was dying of cancer. He didn't realize he was dying, but he was.
When did that start?
It would have been in 1958.
So you would have been about
17, 18.
Yeah.
And my mother at that time had started teaching modeling at a studio in Chicago called Patricia Vance, which was a big deal then. And our house was a big kind of barn-shaped house, and it had a huge, long lot that went way back behind the house, and that's where the garage was. And it was winter, and there was snow and ice on the ground. And my mother was getting ready to go to work, and I said, well, I'll back the car out for you. You just watch for me through the window, which is what they used to do. And when I pull up, you come out, and I'll have the car out there. So I went out the back door, and nobody heard from me again. So, what happened was I had slipped on, it was really ice and snow. Slipped on the ice. It was covered with light snow.
That's horrible.
And they found me lying down there at the bottom of the stairs. And they helped me up, my mother and father helped me up, and I went in the house. And then my mother went on to work. And so I was with my father. And I guess I was acting very strangely. I wasn't talking or doing anything. I was just lying there. And my father decided he should take me to the hospital because I was acting kind of weirdly. So he did. And they took some x-rays. He called a doctor friend who met us there. And they took x-rays. And about a half hour later, we see this doctor at the end of a long hallway waving his arms and said, get her in a wheelchair, get her in a wheelchair. Her back is broken.
Were you walking?
Yeah.
Do you remember being in pain?
No.
Wow. But you remember it. You didn't black out.
No, I didn't black out.
Wow.
Yeah, it was weird. And so they put me in a wheelchair and checked me in, I guess, and put me in traction.
What's that?
Well, at that time, they thought you couldn't move. They thought you should lie still. And so they put me in a bed that was arched the opposite way of my back, which is why I'm sway back.
So you're saying like curved forward?
Curved like this.
So you're like bending backwards and down.
Yes.
That seems like an interesting choice.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a good thing my doctor eventually died, because I've been thinking about it recently. I think had he not, I bet they would have put a rod in my back and done some sort of surgery.
Wow.
But anyway, so the bad thing about that whole deal was that I never saw my father. Well, I saw him one more time alive, and he died a few months after that.
That must have been really, really hard.
And he wouldn't come to the hospital to visit me because he thought cancer was contagious.
Wow.
So he didn't want to bring it in.
That's really hard.
By the time I got out, he was already in the hospital, permanently dying.
So then
I was supposed to, then they put a cast on me from my neck down to my
And how long did you stay in a
thighs.
cast?
3 months. It was supposed to be 4, but they took it off because periodically I would have to go and they take x-rays, and calcium deposits were forming around my bones. And that's bad, they said, because if they formed and finished, I wouldn't have been able to bend at all. So they took me out of the cast and told me I'd have to wear a brace. Then my doctor died. I never got a brace. And that was the end of it.
Wow. So did you go to high school with that, wearing the whole brace?
I did.
What was that like?
Well, got me a lot of attention from the nuns.
Was that good attention?
It was to begin with. They felt sorry for me, and I could get away with things that you couldn't get away with before, like maybe being a little bit late for class, something like that.
Sure.
Not walking in a straight line down the hallway.
Was that normally something you'd get in trouble with?
Oh, yes. There were cadets who...
If you didn't walk in a straight line down the hallway,
Right.
what would they do?
I don't know. I never didn't. I think they gave you detentions or something.
That's pretty scary.
It was.
Wow. So when you were injured, okay, you could walk a little bit
Right.
zigzag. Wow. Okay, well maybe that brings us to kind of talking about what it was like to go to Catholic school growing up.
Well, I mean, it was normal for me because I never went to a non-Catholic school.
Sure.
But the nuns had total control. And the priest fell right in line.
Oh, really? It was
yeah.
the nuns were the ones who were in
Right.
charge.
Right. And
So would you tell me the names of the schools that you went to from elementary to
I went
college?
to Holy Redeemer. That was the one in Evergreen Park.
Elementary?
Yes. Until I was in 2nd grade. Then I went to Christ the King, which was in Chicago, Southside, Beverly Hills, and elementary. Then I went to the Academy of Our Lady, nicknamed Longwood Academy, and that was a different order of nuns. It was School Sisters of Notre Dame. And
Did that mean something different for what the school was like?
I suspect it did, because they were semi-cloistered.
Okay.
They couldn't go out unless they were with another nun. Or to a doctor appointment or something, nothing frivolous.
Because doctor's appointments were frivolous?
No, they weren't.
Oh, okay. Maybe they could go there, but not other places.
They couldn't go out to a party or a restaurant.
Sure.
Whereas the Mercy nuns could eventually
do
whatever they wanted.
So where'd you go next?
Then I went to St. Xavier College.
Okay. So
I got a scholarship, and I'm convinced that the reason I got the scholarship was so I would go to St. Xavier's in Chicago and not go to Miami University, because I had gotten accepted into Miami because my mother had intended to move.
And so you think that someone at the church found out about that and they made sure?
I think the nuns at school swung it. I
see. They wanted to keep you in the north.
Catholic, yeah.
Keep you in a Catholic school.
Right.
So I know you didn't know what it was like to go to another school that wasn't a Catholic school, but what do you think, kind of looking back at it now, what do you think was kind of different about that experience? Like maybe dress code?
I think they were not as regimented. And the Catholic schools were supposed to be better educational institutions. In Chicago, anyway.
You think it was, probably?
I do.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's just that if you were Catholic, that's what you did.
Sure. What about the dress code? I remember you telling me about, having to wear pantyhose, and girls would try to get around that.
Thank God that's different now. We had to wear uniforms. In junior and senior year, they were really ugly. And yes, you could wear bobby socks, but you had to wear nylons underneath.
What are bobby socks, like little white socks?
Yeah, white ankle socks, yeah.
And I remember you telling me about how some of the girls would try to get around wearing the pantyhose.
Yeah, what we would do would be to cut them off and then roll them down to the knee and keep them up with a rubber band and then tuck them into our socks. And so that was how we got around it. Then after school, you could just slip them over your shoes and not have to worry about them. But of course, after cutting these nylon stockings, they became nothing but holes.
Sure. Well, so how did you get to school every day?
Rode the bus, the city bus. After school, a lot of times we'd just walk home.
So from a really young age, you rode the bus. Were you alone, or your parents accompanied you?
No, we walked. When I was in grade school, it was a walking distance, just a couple blocks from home.
So age like 6, you were walking alone?
Yeah, because there were neighborhood schools, but by the time high school came, you could go to any high school as long as it was for girls. Boys went to boys' high schools, and they weren't neighborhood schools, though.
Right.
It might be close to your neighborhood, but it wasn't considered a neighborhood school.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so other than going to school, what role did Catholicism play in your life? Like, what did that mean for kind of your weekly activities or yearly activities?
Well, at a point, I went to Mass every day, which meant getting up really early. then going home and getting dressed and going to school.
Oh, you
But
went every single day before
I
school?
was, yeah.
Wow.
And then that didn't last too long, especially when winter came. But we used to go in our pajamas and just put our coats over our clothes. But then you had to go home and change for school.
What about like the holidays you celebrated? Do you remember anything kind of like special or like?
Well, Easter was always special and supposed to be the greatest holiday.
How did you celebrate?
Much like people still do. Went to Mass first, came home, ate breakfast, and with the family, and which was not the case on a school day. And hunted for Easter eggs.
Sure. You decorate them?
Yes, we did.
And then for Christmas, did Santa come?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Santa came.
Yeah. There was also a religious part.
Yeah, you had to go to Mass.
Lots of Mass. Okay, well, I'm curious to hear about your experience in college. So, what did you study and how did you feel like the education was and how did you like it?
Well, I think that the education was peculiar to me. I don't remember learning a lot, but I remember learning to think for myself. That's a big thing.
Do you remember any particular classes that you took that kind of taught you to think for yourself?
No,
No.
I don't. I really don't.
Okay, well, what did you study?
I was a fine arts major and a math minor, but you still had to take all the other requirements,
Sure.
which everybody had to take. But anyway, I attribute the good thing about it for me was that I don't know if I even ever thought before that.
Right. Do you think it was also kind of meeting other students and having kind of that environment?
No,
No, more so the classes.
I don't. I think, frankly, I think it was more so of being ready to get out of here and move on.
Sure. Sure. Well, what made you decide to study fine arts and math?
Well, I used to draw a lot as a kid, and I mean very young. I started actually taking art lessons when I was 7.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like at
A private woman taught, like, maybe, I don't know. I don't even think there were 10 kids, maybe 7 or 8 kids. And that's where I learned. I learned a lot from her. I mean, I learned how to draw and in charcoal, and then which would be just be black and white. How to look for highlights and stuff like that. And then we went to chalk and worked in color, and then we went into oils.
And you found that to be something you really enjoyed.
I did.
So how are you feeling? You want to keep going or take a break?
No, I think we can keep going for a little bit.
Okay. So before we keep going kind of with the specific parts of your life, I'd like to talk about some major historical events that went on during your life. So, first of all, do you recall anything in particular about the wars that were going on? Did you like the Korean War, the Vietnam War? Did you know anyone who served?
Well, World War II was the first one that I knew of. And I didn't know any of the horrible stuff about war, but I knew about the prejudices and the difficulties some groups of people had in the United States. And with the next war, which I guess was the Korean War, I had two uncles that were actually in the Army.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, one of them was John, my father's younger brother, and I had an uncle, we called him Uncle. Johnny Manessi was kind of adopted by the family. And he turned out to be a pilot and did that. I think he flew for TWA until he died.
TWA?
Trans World Airlines.
Is that...
That was a big airline. I guess it isn't anymore.
I guess not. Maybe it is. I just don't know it.
I don't know either. I don't think so. And they used to come home in their uniforms on leave.
Sure.
And we would be there usually at my grandmother's house or my great aunt's house. And we'd always see them. In fact, my Uncle John sent me a kimono. A kimono.
Oh, wow.
It's beautiful.
Do you still have it?
I still have it. I think it's in storage.
And how old about were you then?
I was pretty little.
Sure.
I don't remember. But the kimono itself is little, so...
You must have been pretty little.
I probably was... Well, the war was over in 45, so it had to be in my first 5 years.
Wow.
It wasn't a baby thing.
Sure.
It was like a little girl thing.
So when they came home, did they ever talk? I mean, you were really little, so I don't know that they wouldn't have said anything.
It was funny because during those years, when we would go to my grandmother's house every Sunday, we'd usually eat dinner, spaghetti and meatballs, and I didn't drink the wine because I didn't like it, but everybody else drank it.
You were offered it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was routine.
Sure.
And I asked for something else, and then I started drinking root beer. That's all they had. And anyway, after that, everybody would retire. All the grown-ups would retire to the kitchen, which then was a big room, not like one's now, but it was a bigger room, and it had a comfortable chair for my grandmother to sit in. And they would all visit and speak Italian, those that knew it. My father would read letters from the old country.
Wow.
So everybody could hear them because he could speak and read Italian. And, yeah, but as kids, we weren't real interested in sitting with that.
Sure.
Oh, there wasn't anything else to do, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Not like TV or anything.
No, but actually not like my maternal grandmother lived with one of her daughters and her 3 children. And at least we had cousins to play with over there.
I see. So, I know obviously you grew up in the North, but in the 1960s, of course, in 1950s, the civil rights movement was going on in the South. And did you ever hear anything about that, or?
Nope.
No, not at all.
Nothing.
Was there any, did you hear of any, or were you aware of any, racism around you?
I was. I had an experience once. A bunch of kids were walking home from school, elementary school, which was common. And at that time our house was 3 blocks from the school, a straight shot though. And we were at the corner waiting to cross the street. They were just neighborhood streets, nothing alarming. And down there at the next corner down, I heard a kid yell, "There goes the Jew." And I did not know what that was.
Oh, wow.
And when I got home, I asked my parents, and they told me that wasn't nice.
Did they tell you what,
I don't remember them explaining it, no.
They just said
they
it wasn't
could
nice.
have, but...
Wow.
Don't listen to him, just... So, yes, there were kids who were quite racist, even at that young age.
Do you remember any, activism or organizing going on in Chicago when you were, a young adult, anything like that?
No. And at Mass, after Mass, we used to pray for the conversion of Russia.
Wow. Isn't that something?
So I figured Russia was a mess.
But you didn't know much about it.
No. We didn't really learn history or geography.
Well, then what did you learn in school?
Math and spelling.
Okay.
English.
Did you have a religion class?
Yes, the priest would come once a week and teach something. I couldn't tell you what he taught, but...
Sounds like it really worked, whatever it was. What do you remember about the Cold War?
I just remember, the only thing I remember, I don't remember specifics. I just remember, because that was later.
Right.
I just remember thinking it all was horrible and needless. And felt bad about it.
Sure.
Like in the early 60s when the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on. We did live in Florida then. And I did see the U.S. troops go marching up Hollywood Boulevard down to Highway 1 to go down to Miami.
Wow.
I do remember that. That's pretty vivid in my mind. But it was very unpleasant.
Right. Well, let's transition back to your life more specifically. So, what was the first job you had? Or one of them, if you don't remember the first one.
Well, the first job I had, I'm still not sure if it really was a job, although I did work. The man who lived on the block owned a bank in the Lithuanian neighborhood, which was a distance from home. And he had a daughter a couple years younger than I. And he said, I guess he told my parents, and I heard it, said that he was going to be caring for her over the summer. And he was going to be taking her to work with him. And would they let me go too, so she had a companion? And my parents agreed, so that's what I did. And although he drove there every day, I didn't get a ride every day. I had to take 2 buses,
Really?
the city bus and then transfer to the suburban bus. Yeah,
But you got paid?
I guess, yeah, I'm pretty sure I got paid. But
Wow.
that's where I learned how to work a switchboard. It was the old kind it was a trunk board.
What's that?
You put the cords into a hole.
Oh. I've never seen one of those.
The Ernestine character, Lily Tomlin character, Ernestine, used to work one of those when she was doing a comedy act.
And oh, okay. None of that really rings a bell to me, but it may to someone.
That was my first job.
Do you remember liking it? What was that like?
Yeah, I liked it. It was fun.
Do you have any clue how much money you made?
Oh, I can't believe it was more than 50 cents an hour. If even that.
Well, what other jobs did you have after that?
I actually wrote this all up in one of my note things, but
We don't have to go through all of it, but just if there's
no,
anything.
I know, because it's funny how I tend to forget.
Just maybe.
I babysat a
Sure.
bit, not a lot.
Yeah.
I did not like babysitting.
No?
No, I was always scared.
Scared of.
The dark, the boogeyman, everything.
Would you be babysitting overnight?
No,
Okay.
just while parents went and did something and then came home. Okay, so that was grade school. That was probably late grade school. One year I got a job before I was 18, but I had to lie and say I was 18. There were two other young girls who worked there too, and they had to lie also.
Wow.
But one of my father's sisters had a friend who worked in a find employment,
No. What's
business, an employment business.
that? So, like, trying to find people jobs?
Yes.
Okay.
So she found me this job, and it was with Lions International. It was a membership club. I don't know what they did. And my job was to type up metal plates for the mailing list. And then to get a break from the noise of the typewriter hitting the metal plates, you would get to go and sit and file the plates in the file room. It was a horrible job.
Seems pretty tedious.
It was awful. And then the first time I knew how to I would take the Rock Island train downtown, then get on an L train, which is the one that's supposed to circle around the loop, and they're downtown Chicago, and then get off at your stop and go to work, like right there. So I did that. Then I tried to do it on the way home. Figured how hard this be. It's just the reverse. And I got on the wrong L train, and it took me to no man's land. And I was scared to death. It was raining out. I got off, and you had to go back again. You had to go down the stairs, across the street, and up the stairs to go the opposite direction. So I did that, and I called my mother, and I told her I was lost. I said, "Could you come pick me up?" And she said, "No." She said, "You get on the right train and come home."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That must have been pretty scary.
It was. Because when you're walking under there are all sorts of, probably now they'd be homeless. I don't know that they were then. But they obviously were drunks and criminals of some sort, I suppose, yelling at you.
Sounds scary.
Then, the year my father died, I was still in high school, but a man who lived up the street owned a restaurant in the neighborhood. It was a famous, well-established, popular restaurant, and he offered me a job as a cashier at night. So I took it, which then I worked at night, so my mother could work during the day, and I could take care of my two sisters during the day. So I did that for, I don't remember how long. I did that probably through my first year of college.
It sounds like a lot of work. Was that kind of just an expectation that you would take care of them?
She asked me. I mean, who's going to say no?
Of course. And you were in school, too. You were in college.
Or else I was finishing high school.
Wow. And so you lived at home through that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then when did you get married?
I was almost 22. No, I was 22. 1963.
And
we lived in Florida then.
You lived in Florida then?
Hollywood, Florida, yeah.
In 1963, but then you moved back to Evanston, or no? You moved back north.
Right, because of my husband.
Okay, so you moved...
Who couldn't seem to hold a job.
Okay, so you moved... when you got married, you moved down to Florida. Is that right?
No.
Or you met in Florida?
No, we didn't meet in Florida. We met up in Chicago.
Okay.
At a party of just kids.
Sure.
And no, I probably was in college by then. I must have been, because I only knew him 2 years.
Sure.
And then we got married. And then Paul was born in 1964.
In Madison?
Right, because he was a student. I supported us.
Right. And then when was Emmett born?
66.
And then
Catherine, 67. By then we did live in Evanston.
Right. And so it seems like you were kind of raising them on your own.
Always.
What was that like in working?
I wasn't working then, no.
No.
In fact, I told Bill Donnelly when I did get pregnant, I said, and I think about that now, and I think, God, I'm so glad I did that and stuck to it. I said, I'll work until the day the baby's born. After that, you've got to bring in the money.
There you go.
I know.
Yeah.
I was not anybody who I ever thought would be that firm, but I was.
You had to be.
Of course, it didn't last, but...
Sure.
At
Okay.
least while the kids were babies, it did.
So now, could you tell me a little bit about what you do for fun with your kids in Evanston? Like what kinds of things you would do to have fun?
Well, we went to the park or the beach, depending on the season.
The beach meaning on the
Lake Michigan.
right.
We live just a short half a block from there. So I'd put them in the wagon, put 2 in the wagon, and push the buggy with the baby in it to the beach, and then go home at lunchtime, bathe them, get the sand off and everything, and put them in for a nap and eat. And then after naps, we'd go to the park usually, where they then got all full of sand again. And so that's mostly what we did. In the winter, I still took them down to the beach and would put them on the sled and push them down a slight hill. Well, it wasn't slight, but it was short. And I would push them down, and then I'd have to run down to the bottom of the hill and catch them before they went in the lake. I think about that, and I think, God, that was funny.
It's a cold lake too.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the waves used to freeze along the beach.
Wow. So, what prompted you to move to Gainesville, Florida?
Well, I wanted to move to Florida for years, as did my parents. And I chose Gainesville because of the university, because I knew that my children would have to live at home. I couldn't afford to send them all away.
So,
And that was important to me, that they went to college.
right. So, when did the divorce happen? Was that before you moved or
No.
no?
Well, the ex-husband called me once and said, "You filed for divorce down in Florida." We weren't actually divorced. We were just like separated.
Like
we
you
didn't
said-
live together.
You said I'm moving with the kids.
No, I told him we were moving. That was
Yeah.
before that.
Yeah.
Then after we did move, he called and said, "You filed for divorce in Florida because it's a no-fault state." And I said, "Okay." So I did. And then he got it all screwed up. He countersued me and claimed I abandoned him and took his children.
Okay.
But then the divorce actually came through not until 1984, although we'd already been separated for almost 20 years.
Sure. Well, will you tell me about the move down to Florida with 3 young children, what that was like and how
Yes.
you got here?
Right. So we lived in Ottawa for 2 years, and all that time I'd been saving change in milk jugs. Any change we got went into the milk jugs. And one day we had like 3 or 4 milk jugs full of change. So we took a cab to the bank,
And by we, you mean
the kids and I,
right.
and cashed it in, and I had enough to buy plane fare. And so I thought I arranged with his sister, ex-husband's sister, to care for the kids for a week or 2 weeks, whichever it took. And she agreed. And I was specific about not ever leaving them alone with him. Only as it turns out, she did. But I didn't know that until it was too late. But, okay, so I flew down, and I had a sister who lived here, and she let me stay in her apartment with them. And then I flew back, and flew back again to here with the kids. And we moved into our apartment.
You flew down in a plane. So when you came the first time, you arranged like the apartment lease and stuff like that? Or you got that after the second time?
No, that came in just a very short time. There was a vacancy and I just looked into it.
What about, did you have a job lined up when you came down?
No.
No.
That was the first thing I had to do, was to get a job. And I didn't have a car. So I went to the shopping mall that was closest. And Belk was a department store. So I went in there and got a job like overnight.
You just said, are you hiring, basically?
No, I didn't ask them. I just said, I need a job. Do you have any openings?
And they did. So what did you do there?
Well, the thing I was technically hired for was gift wrapping. And, but the gift wrapper also worked in the stock room. You know, getting stuff ready to put on the shelves.
Sure.
And then eventually, in a short time, they asked me if I would work in the office, which I did. And I counted all the money every day and got it deposited. And then and they had a little post office, and I worked in the post office. I did every job they had, actually, except I was not a sales clerk.
Okay. And then when did you stop working for them?
Yeah, I worked there 6 years. And it was a good deal because it was so close to home. And my kids could come up there on days off or after school and hang out without any problem. In fact, they used to go down to the toy store.
Oh, yeah, because the mall wasn't where it is now, right? The mall was...
No, it was called Gainesville Shopping Center. It might still be called that. It's where there's a Publix where Belk used to be.
Is it the one on Main Street?
Yes.
Okay, right. And then you all lived, the house you moved into was right in the neighborhood on Northwest 13th and 16th, right? 13th Street and 16th Avenue.
Well, we lived in an apartment complex called Granada first.
Oh, okay.
And then we moved into that little house on 13th Avenue.
So what was that house like when you got there?
It was a total dump.
How'd you deal with that?
I cleaned and cleaned and cleaned. And I hired a man who did maintenance at Belk. Not maintenance, janitorial work at Belk. And he was so kind. He did like most of the really dirty work. Like in the closets, there were mounds of roach droppings. Like mounds.
That's like horrifying.
It is horrifying. And they had dogs in one of the bedrooms. The doors and the walls were all scratched up from the dogs, probably trying to get out. And there were curtains, and the curtains were embedded with roaches. And I called the owner, and I said, this place is uninhabitable. He sent his wife and mother over to clean. So that kind of got a lot of the dirt out, so it wasn't as hard to clean up after that.
Wow.
But that was a nightmare. It was awful.
Could you tell me a bit more about what it was like to be a single mother in 1960s, 1970s Gainesville? Like, I recall that you all were pretty tight on money, and so
Very tight on money. But we used to go everywhere together. People would recognize it because we'd be riding our bikes.
right, because you didn't have a car.
Right.
What did your children know about the amount of money that you had?
Oh, I think they knew we were poor.
Yeah.
Catherine especially.
Mm-hmm. I recall also though that you tried to kind of hide it from them a little bit.
I did.
Yeah. I remember specifically about the school lunches. Could you tell that story?
Oh, that was back in Evanston, I think.
Oh, that was.
We must have been separated then. And they had free lunch for kids who couldn't afford to buy it, which was my kids. And I remember Paul saying one day, somebody must have asked him, "Are you paying for lunch or whatever?" And he said, "No, I have free lunch." It's funny. But, yeah, lunch was free, thank goodness. Hopefully it still is.
Another thing that, I've heard from my dad and my aunt and uncle is that you used to try to make holidays really special, even though
I did.
you were really tight on money. So could you tell me a little bit about that and how you would do that, even though, you didn't have much to give?
Well, I always called it, that first 6 years, I always called it a Belk Christmas.
Belk, like the department store.
Yeah, because I got a discount on stuff. Like if they needed jeans, I could get a 20% discount, which helped. But I would buy them. That's when they would get their new pajamas or their underwear and socks. And I would wrap everything separately and put a quarter, any change I had, or sometimes a silver dollar. Since I worked and touched all the money at Belk, I could, if anybody paid with silver dollar, I could trade it in and take it home. And so I'd put money in each one of the packages, so they had some money by the time they finished opening everything.
Wow. And would you buy the wrapping paper from Belk, or were you able to use the wrapping paper?
I usually bought it because it had to be different than...
Right.
They would have known it
that it wasn't
from Belk.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so when you first came down, were they all in elementary school?
Yes.
Yeah. And pretty immediately they went to PK Young, right?
Well, that was 3 different years.
Because it was like a lottery. Is that why?
Yeah. Not a lottery, but they had certain criteria for going there. And if you fit the criteria, then maybe it was a lottery. I don't know. But I think Catherine got in first.
Okay.
And I think then Paul did, then Emmett did.
So how did you know, because this isn't just like a typical neighborhood school, right? How did you figure out that you wanted to send your kids there?
Because I knew it was a lab school at UF. It had to be better than the public schools.
Right, which, could you tell me a little bit more about like what you heard about the school and how it was different from others? You said it was a lab school, but like for people who wouldn't know what that is.
No, they had been at a lab school in Evanston.
Your kids had?
Yeah. And actually that school desegregated the Evanston school, so...
Was that part of why you sent them there, or they already went there before that?
No, that's why I sent them there.
Okay.
Because they could get bused.
Sure.
And they could all be together and they'd still get the best education.
So then basically a lab school is like people are doing research on the education there.
Yeah, and they get more master teachers.
Sure.
Who want to teach there.
Could you tell me a bit what the political scene was like in 1970s Gainesville or in Florida more generally? Like, do you remember any kind of activism going on, or was there anything that you were aware of? I mean, you were obviously working really hard at the time.
Well, I remember in Gainesville going to see Clinton when he went to UF.
He came like on a campaign tour?
Yeah, must have been. And I went with Paul. And then one time Jesse Jackson came. And I was president of the CWA and vice president of Central Labor. And so I got to go in and be like right in the front, and he came right up to me and shook my hand.
Wow, I bet that was pretty amazing.
It was.
Well, so let's talk about that. So when did you start working for the city of Gainesville?
Let's see.
About
81.
Okay. So was that when you left Belk and you started working for the city?
Well, I got the city job first before I left Belk.
Okay.
And Belk just wasn't paying any money. I made $4.05 an hour.
Wow.
And the city to start was offering $4.26 with a pay raise every 6 months. And I remember when I told them I was leaving at Belk, a silly little supervisor says, "Oh, I'll match that salary." And I said, "No, I'll get another raise in 6 months."
Right. Yeah, a city job. It's
the benefits were better. Everything was better. And the reason I could leave Belk, or decided that it was time, was because they kept increasing my hours. See, at first I only worked 9 to 2 Monday through Friday, which was perfect because I could see the kids off and meet them at after school.
Right.
And I didn't have to worry about working weekends. And then they started increasing my hours, and Belk was really not a very good employer. I mean, they took terrible advantage and fired people frequently. And so I started applying for jobs at the city and got a call in to interview for the one. It was just a secretarial position in the personnel department.
Okay. So then when did you start working for the City Workers Union? What was the union called?
Communication Workers of America.
Okay. And
CWA.
CWA. So when did you start working with them?
Almost right away.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and what got me interested there was they used to meet for contract negotiations in the Thomas Center, which is where I used to work, and we would see them going in and going up the stairs. One time I said, "Well, who is that group?" And the woman who worked with me said, "Oh, those are the officers in CWA, and they're going into contract negotiations." And that year, I think it was that year, they negotiated pay raises for everybody except, couldn't have been that year, except the account clerks. And there were like 4 of us who didn't get a pay raise that year.
Wow.
I thought, oh, they're really saving a bunch of money. Because we were low paid. And anyway, I remember telling myself, that's a really stupid union. So then I got active. I just joined. I became a steward right away.
A steward is like an officer position?
Yeah, sort of, but you don't get paid or anything. And then I ran for vice president and won that. Then I ran for president and won that.
What kind of, like, what were you running on? Like, what did you say that you wanted to accomplish?
Improve wages and benefits.
And I guess the other people didn't want to. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, they had a record of not doing that. So
Sure. Okay. Gotcha. So then how many years were you president of CWA?
3. I was in office like 6 years.
Had they had other presidents who were women before that?
No, I was the first. I doubt they have had one since.
Okay.
I'd
Wow.
be surprised.
It seems like that was a pretty big deal
It
at
was.
the time.
I couldn't believe I won.
You still had. So this was in the 80s. So I guess the kids were more grown up
in
at that
college,
point.
yeah.
Okay. So could you tell me a little bit about what CWA accomplished while you were president or vice president? What you know?
Well, I always negotiated really good contract terms.
And how would that work? Like, could you tell me about, so you would go in with
You sit down, and you go in with your proposal, and the city had their proposals, and mine won.
so you'd go in with like an arbitrator and your bosses? No, who would decide?
Well,
on
the
this?
management was on the other side.
Okay.
But I was just good at it because I wouldn't back down. I wouldn't give up. In fact, they used to call me the bulldog.
They called you the bulldog.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that terrible?
I mean, they probably meant it. Oh, you mean the managers called you that?
Yeah, the only woman ever, and they had to think of a nasty name for me.
Of course they did. Probably gave you some more fire, though.
One time the city manager liked me a lot, so I was actually, and so did some of the commissioners. So I felt safe in my job, which always was the worry that I would get fired. But one time I was talking to the city manager, and he says, yeah, he said at our staff meeting, which was all managers, he said, I told them all that I learned more about my organization from Linda Donnelly than I do about all of them, from all of them. And I said, well, no wonder they hate me.
Oh, wow. Wow. So the main issues that you feel that city workers faced at the time was like low wages,
Mm-hmm.
poor hours, poor benefits.
And
Unfair wages.
Yeah, very high at the top and very low throughout.
I see. So in general, when you challenged the city, there was some pushback against you personally and against the union.
Yes, a lot.
Did you ever hear of them firing someone who was in the union and you have to work to get their job back?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd file a grievance quoting what contract violations they made. And then you go, it was the city manager at the time who would be able to decide yes or no. And since he liked me, I won a lot. Because he knew I was telling the truth, whereas he couldn't be sure his managers were telling the truth.
Wow. So when did you stop working for the city? Was that when you retired?
Yes.
So when about was that?
I was 62. When was I 62? 20 years ago.
So 2002 about?
Yeah.
So do you think there was any effect of your work with the city on your views on local and national politics? Like, do you think that shaped the way you look at the way government is run, or in any way, or the way you feel about things? Probably, but nothing specific.
I don't think I can name something, but
Sure.
I'm sure it did, because I was quite liberal as opposed to any other.
Right. So as your kids got older, jumping back a little bit, how did they help out with the household? Was there any...
They always would help if I needed it or wanted it or asked for it, but I never did.
Sure.
At least extremely rarely if I did, because my whole thing was their job was to go to school and get that degree.
And that's why you moved to Gainesville in the first place.
Yeah, I didn't want them to have to work a menial job while they were in school or after.
Wow.
So I did whatever I could, which was just to provide a home.
And then even when they were at the University of Florida, they still lived at home, right?
Yes.
And that was, how many bedrooms did the house have?
3, but very tiny.
Yeah.
Half of this room.
And so was it my dad and his brother shared a room?
Right, eventually. It was funny the way they used to move them around.
You'd come home and then...
I'd come home and they'd be carrying beds from one room to another. It was funny. Eventually they decided that Paul and Emma should share a room and Catherine should have her own room because she was a girl and she needed a place for a drafting table.
Drafting?
Drafting table, yeah.
What's that?
An architect draws on a drafting table.
Oh, I see. Okay. Wow.
And then my room became the smallest one.
They moved your stuff into the smallest room?
Well, yeah, they had to. It was what was left.
Wow.
I mean, they had to take the bigger one, which I had originally. And when I say bigger, it probably was a foot, maybe bigger.
Were they in... They weren't in bunk beds, were they? They were just
No, they were twin beds.
Twin beds, and next to each other. Well,
In fact, I bought them when my mother died.
What was that like to, be living with adult kids throughout their time at undergrad?
It was great. I learned a lot from them.
Yeah.
They were the ones who were more radical than I.
Anything like in particular about?
I mean, just they were really smart. I wasn't.
They'd come home and they could tell you about what they learned and
anything. I mean, they were just really knew what they were talking about.
Well, coming to an end here, but I was wondering if you could tell me about your grandchildren and what it's like for you being a grandmother and how that's been different from being a parent.
Well, I think it is true what people used to say all the time is having children, you've got a lot of responsibility, but with the grandchildren, you just get to enjoy.
Right.
The parents have the responsibility, not me.
Sure. You took on a lot of responsibility back then.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm so tired.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that the other day. I thought, wait a minute. I should be tired.
Yeah. I think you have every right.
Because I used to have to go to city commission meetings as the president of the union and vice president. And they would last till 2 in the morning. They weren't any of these afternoon meetings. It was nighttime.
Wow.
And I'm riding a bicycle.
So you ride home at like 2 a.m.?
I did that from the CWA meetings too, every month.
I hope you had lights.
I had a light, I'm sure. But I think
Wow.
about that. I wouldn't do that today. But, I mean, there was no option. If somebody offered me a ride, but rarely did that happen.
Wow.
Usually they wanted something in return, which they weren't going to get, so.
Sure. Wow. Well, you made a lot of sacrifices. We're really glad to have you next door now.
Oh, God, I know. It's so perfect.
Yeah. We just, well, do you want to talk about your most recent move, which was like a year ago?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a whole year, but it has been.
Right.
Because it was a beginning of April.
Right.
2021, yeah. Well, it's just been fantastic. It's couldn't be more perfect.
So you moved out of your condo.
Well, I did that first.
Sure. Which was like a year before.
I think it was about that long.
Yeah.
And
And
I
then
went to Catherine's, and then I came to your house.
and the pandemic really slowed down the building, but basically, where do you live now? Could you talk about that?
I live in my house.
Yeah, I know, but it's a little bit of a special location. And the way it was built and stuff. Could you just, I mean, I know about it. I just want it to be recorded.
Well, it's on my son's property. His house is on the same property.
And who designed it?
And my daughter designed it. Everything.
Yep.
Everything, every bit. I mean, it's amazing the job she did.
Definitely.
Although that was her thing that she wanted to do always, was design homes for people to live in.
Well, it's great that she got to design one for her own mom.
She did, I know.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you can finally stop moving around and you have
I am too.
a home that's perfect for you.
Because I am tired, and now that we're talking, I realize why.
Yeah, you've done a lot.
I've been going full speed for 80 years.
Right. Not to mention the injuries.
Right.
Yeah. But full speed, never stopping. Lots of sacrifices.
No time to stop.
Yep. Well,
But I do have a wonderful family. I mean, it couldn't be better.
I totally agree. Well, is there anything else that I didn't bring up that you'd like to discuss before we close
Well,
out?
I was thinking recently about things that made an impression on me when I was quite young. One of the biggest was my parents took me to see South Pacific, the musical in Chicago, stage performance. And I just loved it. I love it to this day. But there's a song in it that the lieutenant sings after he and a Polynesian girl fall in love and want to get married. And it's just so priceless. I can't believe that somebody could write it. It was just so good. And when You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. Isn't that perfect?
Yeah. What does that make you think about?
All the discrimination and racism that's going on.
Today and always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to stop.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't know. I can't think of anything.
We can always have
More, yeah.
another round of this later. Yeah, I'm sure there's much more that you could say, but this seems like a pretty, good place to start. So, thank you, Grandma.
Well, thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.